Welcome everybody, all looking very serious. Can I acknowledge you, and of course your spouse and yourself. Good to have you here. Give them a round of applause. Like Nick has, I acknowledge the traditional owners, past and present, and of course the important connectivity that we have in Australia with elders past and present, and the linkage with the Indigenous Australia. So just to reinforce Nick's message, it was actually this time at the last federal election that coal was a big issue here, and the Aibc, the national chair, that's myself, we decided to stick our neck out and support Adani in what was a very, very volatile political environment. It got national news right across Australia. Obviously, I got some flack during that period, but we've kind of healed that. That was in the last election, and from the standpoint of Adani, that was actually quite important that Australia-India Business Council supported Indian investment in Australia. I explained that to both sides of politics. I'm apolitical. I don't favour one side or the other. I favour whichever side is most in the public interest and in the public interest of the Aibc. I think that move actually strengthened the Aibc's credibility around Australia as supporting Indian industry. Now we, as Nick has said, we're heading to our 36th year, voluntary body. We've never had a better profile than we currently have. And as you know, with all Indian communities, we always have divisions, differences of opinion. Sometimes that can become very volatile, sometimes less volatile, right? But we've never been better united. We have our National Treasurer here, Nick Mehta. He's here too, and I acknowledge his presence too. And it's good to have all of us here together today. So just to tell you where we're at in terms of what is different about Aibc today as opposed to during the time of the last election. We're now on the verge of putting a new IT platform that will connect all our different businesses much better than the past. Without that kind of digital technology, we can't really leap ahead in terms of linking trade and investment. That's an initiative that's currently underway, and my colleagues are doing that. We've also done an innovation in the last 3 years of establishing 17 industry chapters with key sectors of the Indian-Australia Trade Agreement. And you've got Ashurst there, he heads up the sports industry chair. We've got our National Treasurer that oversights a lot of that stuff, gives advice there. You've got Nick, that also at one stage was doing resources, but he's now also Queensland President, but he's looking at also going back into that. And of course, you've got Kritika supporting our national industry chairs. I don't think there's another national industry chair today here, so I'll acknowledge them. And there's Chamana Monam, who's also heads up trade and investment. So these 17 industry chapters supplement our presidents and our management chapters in each state and territory. The other additional innovation we've done that you'll be pleased to know is that we have formed Aibc Business Enterprises, affectionately called AIBE. Now, the sole soul of AIBE, it's a subsidiary company of Aibc, is to increase the trade and investment between India and Australia. Now that, I also hope, will be a member value adding organisation. So if we have deals that need to be made, members participate in the deal, they can be appropriately rewarded according to the governance structure that we put into place. So that initiative is underway as we speak. They've already got a couple of deals through the commas, and I actually expect that 5 years from now, the revenue from that alone will far exceed our membership revenue. Then you will see an even more powerful Aibc with the money to fund a really high-level chief executive and secretariat, and we'll find that the Australia-India relationship will accelerate to a point that we are right at pulling it through. Now, on Friday, I've just made these appointments. I'm going to Canberra to basically talk to DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Austrade, the Office of National Intelligence, and the Department of Education and Indian Relations. The purpose of that visit is to make it very clear to those agencies that there is only one body in Australia that can actually have the credibility to get the India-Australian relationship together. Now, you'll always have feral organisations that claim they are it. That's just the way things are at. But we have a 36-year-old history behind us, and we are now in the most exciting phase of where we are. I've never seen more motivated men and women in Aibc driving the India-Australia relationship. So it's great that you're here today. I hope you put that message back into India. You're as networked as I am, so I think we can look forward to that. And I really look forward to the dialogue we have with you here, and welcome you at a time which is most historic in the Australia-India relationship, the free trade agreement, the need to move forward. And can I share that in my other hat, newly appointed hat as the Chancellor of Torrens University Think Group, I also want to see the links, closer links between Australia and India in higher education and vocational education. So on that note, Nick, if you didn't mind that bit of promo for another organisation, I'll leave it to you.
Partha, can I invite you up to say a few words on
Sure. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply impressed with whatever was mentioned by three previous speakers, Mr. Jim, particularly the role of Aibc. And I also see that among the countries with whom India can relate well and in a much more deeper manner, I think Australia stands at the foremost. We have definitely bigger relationships possibly with US or maybe other countries, but there is a natural kind of a synergy between these two countries, and both are large democracies. And I think particularly in the context of the strained relationship that Australia and China are having with each other, I think India-Australia partnership can definitely grow. I had met earlier a gentleman, Mr. Peter Varghese, whose document is shared with the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industries in Calcutta. He has written a a document till 2035. What should happen between India and Australia? And people in India are very serious about those documents. What kind of areas he has identified? Education being one. Mining technology being another one. Electronics, IT, so many other fields. So I think we are really heading towards a very exciting times, both the countries, and we look forward to that. I had an interesting relationship at one point of time with Ashurst, because they hired me to understand better a particular case which one of our Indian companies had, I think, acquired a coal mine, was trying to acquire a coal mine, made certain commitments, didn't fulfill the commitments, and there was a court case. So the situation was I had to explain what was the Indian coal mining conditions sometime in 2011, 12 and all that. I think I did that well because I was paid handsomely. So coming to today's subject, let me put it this way, that every country in the world and the world as a whole is facing two important dichotomies, or rather two important challenges, as I may say that. The first is, of course, the climate change, the climate challenge. It was a threat maybe a decade or decade and a half ago. Today it is a reality. We are seeing this day in and day out. Many parts of the world are facing extreme climate conditions. It has become quite regular. You had a flood some time back. We had floods. Floods which are supposed to be once in 500 years floods are happening every year. So that is the kind of situation we are witnessing. So I think something has gone wrong in the climate. And people do blame these climatic conditions to global warming. And global warming, unfortunately, is connected deeply with emissions of greenhouse gases. In the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide has a share of 60% plus. So, and that is emitted from burning of fossil fuels. So fossil fuel burning is naturally has come under attack, and it's rightly so. I mean, if we have to meet this climate challenge. I mean, we can't say we'll not meet it, because then we are living an unsustainable world for the next generation. So that cannot happen. So we have to meet this, and therefore fossil burning has to be phased out. There is no doubt about that. I think this was said loud and clear in COP26 and everywhere. Along with this, there is another challenge. I mean, we cannot forget that as well, which is providing energy security to every country, every economy. Every country has growing energy needs, and that has to be met. We can't say no to that as well. In that context, the situation is quite different between country to country. If you look at, let us say, advanced countries, there the situation is there is a growth. Even advanced countries, the energy requirement is growing, because the energy requirement is connected with GDP growth. If there is a GDP growth, energy requirement will grow. Now, but there, because the growth in advanced countries is somewhat less than the developing countries, so energy requirement increase is also less. That has to be handled. That is one part. So in most cases where we are trying to phase out fossil fuel with renewable, addition of renewable in an advanced country will lead to automatic somewhat phase down of fossil fuel. But in countries like India, where the requirement has to grow much faster, because we are, for example, today India consumes, a per capita consumption of electricity is just about 1200 units. You are at 9,800. China is at 5,000. World average is 3,000. So if we have to develop, and we have to develop, there is no two ways to that. In that case, this has to grow. So the general target that the country has adopted is to reach somewhere around 3,000 kind of a level, that is the world average, by 2030. By that time, the world average will be different. But at least today's average, if we can reach in 2030, in 8 years' time from now, it will mean reasonably good progress. But what does that mean? That means today you are 1,200, 3,000, 1,800 incremental energy units per person, and on a population of 1.3 billion, that means 2,500 billion units more. We have a very ambitious renewable program. It has already manifested itself as one of the most ambitious programs. In 5 years, we have increased our renewable capacity by 11 times. We are today the 4th country in the world to be on 100 gigawatt plus renewable capacity. We are at 150 today. We reached 100 gigawatt about a year and a half back. So that's where we are. So there is an ambitious program going on renewables. The Prime Minister has targeted 500 gigawatt. He has openly announced in COP26 that we must reach 500 gigawatt by 2030. But the point is that even if we reach 500 gigawatt in 2030, that is not going to give you this 2,500 billion units. That's going to give hardly 50% of that 2,000. So where will the rest 50% come from? It has to come from fossil fuel. There's no way out. So we are today consuming about 1 billion tons of coal annually. That will move up to 1.5 billion. That's for sure. Doesn't mean that we are ignoring the climate aspects, but it also means that we are trying to make a balance between tackling the climate aspects, not doing everything on fossil fuel, and also meeting people's aspirations. It's like that. Now let's look at 2050. In 2050, because everybody is trying to become net zero in 2050. Now, why did India suggest 2070? That could be a question. In 2050, if let us say we aspire to become, in terms of energy consumption, per capita energy consumption, not the world average, but somewhere around the developed world. Say we move from 1,200 to 6,000. 6,000 is not the highest in the developed world. I mean, you are at 10,000 today. That time you will be 15,000. So 6,000 if we aim at. So 1,200 to 6,000 is 500 times. Today, we have a mix of 30-70. 30% is renewable, or rather non-fossil fuel. 70% is fossil fuel in the country. Now, you apply on 500. If you reverse it, we expect that by 2050, it will be definitely reversed. That means fossil fuel will be not more than 30% and non-fossil fuel will be 70%. So even if you apply this 30% on that 500 is 150, which is today 70. So it's double. If we have 1 billion today, we'll have to consume 2 billion tons at that time. That is the conflict between environment and meeting energy security, meeting energy aspirations, the aspirations of the people in terms of energy flows. So this problem has to be properly understood. I mean, there is no point in telling that India must go, go off fossil fuel. We can't. In that case, we have to make the entire country dark. So this dichotomy needs to be understood and appreciated when we chart out our future path. Now, what has been India's last few years? What has been the experience? See, we became very serious about renewables after the Paris COP21, the Paris summit, and we committed certain things in Paris. The first commitment was that the the non-fossil fuel capacity will become 40% by 2030 of the total electricity generation. We are already at 40%. We have met that 8 years in advance. Second commitment was the emission intensity of GDP on a benchmark of 2005 will be brought down to 40%, will be brought down by 33% in 2030. We are already close to that. By 2030, we are sure to become 45% less in terms of emission intensity. So India is one of the countries, and not very many countries have done it, who have been able to completely comply with whatever it promised in COP21. That's one. We have made more stiffer commitments in COP26, you're aware of, but we didn't go for net zero by 2050 for the reason that I mentioned. We have projected 2070. I don't know whether 2070 will hold, whether for the world as a whole 2050 or 2060 will hold. It's not an easy solution. There's a huge issues there. So this is now, having started in the right earnest with renewables from 2015 onwards, we have been actually growing the capacity at a breakneck speed because there has been public sector, private sector participation, common efforts. Government policies were very, very pro-solar, pro-renewable. I can just list out some. For example, renewables have a must-take clause. That means if a renewable unit is produced somewhere, that has the first right of entering into the grid system. All thermal power units are based on a merit order system. They have to compete in terms of cost. So if those whichever are least costly, they only enter. The high cost ones are left out. Whereas for renewable, it is not that. It is must take. Any renewable has sort of a default setting. It has to get into the system first. So renewable is assured of market. Whereas thermal is not assured. Unless they are cost competitive, they are not assured. So that is one. Second, they don't have to bear any share of the T&D losses. And you will know, Nick, that T&D losses in India is quite high, not like advanced countries like, because there is a lot of theft. There's a lot of, it happens, it goes on. So we have an average T&D loss of something like 25 to 30%. That has to be borne by entirely the fossil fuel power. The renewable doesn't bear that. When renewable is priced, that is not considered into this. These are the advantages. Then there are capital subsidies. There's a lot of capital subsidy. There's the accelerated depreciation. All these facilities are there. And look at fossil fuel. Coal. India doesn't have any other fossil fuel. Gas is hardly anything. Coal is the main thing. Coal was given a headwind. First headwind was that it was charged as sort of a carbon tax, 50 rupees a ton, which goes into, is applied, just government to pick up some money. And it's a sort of a headwind, carbon tax kind of a thing. This 50 in 2015 has been increased successively to 400 rupees. And 400 rupees is about 1/3 of the price of coal. So 1/3 add-on has happened just to give a negative sort of a thing to it, so that it becomes cost ineffective. That is one headwind. Second, there is a long sort of, it has been continuing for very long, headwind of railway freight. Railway freight in India, I don't know, many of you may not be aware, is the highest in the world in terms of rupees per ton kilometer. If you express it in rupees or dollars per ton kilometer, it is the highest in the world. And why it is the highest? It should not be the highest. I mean, India is not such an affluent country to bear that kind of a cost. That's because India needs to hugely cross-subsidize passenger fare. And it subsidizes passenger fare by rail freight on coal, not other commodities, only coal. So coal has that headwind. So average coal moves by about 500 kilometers in the country. And so whosoever is about, say, not at the pit head, 400-500 kilometers or more away, and there are many such power plants, they are hit by this railway freight. So with all these kind of things, what we found between 2018-19, I think 2018-19 was the last year, I mean, leaving aside the current phase, when there was a growth in coal supply and coal production. After that, the growth stopped. And sort of obituaries were coming out. That is the end of coal. I mean, coal is gone. Sort of a death sentence. In 1819, Coal India produced 607 million. Coal India is actually 82% of India, so rest is all not very organized. So we talk about Coal India only here. It produced 607 million tons of coal. In 1920, the next year, it produced 602 million tons of coal, but could supply even less. As a result, stocks increased. That was unheard of. That never happened. Coal India's history, it never happened. 2021, further dropped by 1%. There was a degrowth in 2 successive years by 1% each. 607 to 602 and the 602 to 596. And in 2021, something very drastic happened. The coal stock increased from 75 million tons opening stock to 100 million tons. So 25 million tons of that 596 also could not be sold. So people were thinking that that's gone. I mean, that's renewables must be taken care of, the requirement. The fact that there was a COVID impact on the economy and therefore economic growth was muted, that was somewhat forgotten. And there are other issues, like for example, Coal India was pushing coal into the power stations. So the power stations were reluctant to take that coal. They never paid. They were not paying. So you are supplying coal, I mean you supply, but we haven't paid. The stock management of coal, the power stations were doing based on Coal India. Coal India had a lot of pitted stocks. So power stations felt that they are comfortable. If Coal India has stocks, they need not build up stocks. This is completely contrary to the norms that Central Electricity Authority has laid down for power sector. Every power plant is supposed to have a coal stock of not less than 15 days, not more than 30 days. That's optimum. They simply forgot that. They were having 7-10 days of stock like that. This was March 21. First quarter of 2021, we had a second wave of COVID. And everything was thrown at a disorder. That was one of the worst waves. I think it was more serious than the first wave. So the Delta wave. In fact, Coal India lost 250 people in that wave. So production suffered. Even power generation was also suffering. By June, that wave had gone. And by July, something like post-COVID recovery started. And the moment that started, there was a huge energy demand. And renewables were never to be seen. Where are renewables? I mean, they are where they were, but they were not in a position to meet this sudden surge in requirement. Fortunately, because of this lackluster kind of a situation that continued for 3 years, all power stations were at 50% plus PLF. We have never seen the PLF slow down. 80% PLF is what I have seen in my tenure. That was down to 50%. In that kind of a PLF, the GenCos were unable to pay debt service payments to the banks. They were just limping. But that came handy. That's the only thing that came handy. So since the capacity is there, you supply coal, PLF rises, power is available. And gradually that started happening. So initially what they did was they were drawing on whatever coal they had in the stock, but that was only 8 days. So despite Coal India trying to meet the daily requirement, it was falling short by to some extent because there was a extended rains. In the second quarter there was rains, and this was an extended monsoon in 2021. It continued till end of September, October. So Coal India supply also got affected there. They started drawing from stocks, and on 8th of October to be precise, the stocks reached a level of 4 days, which was considered very, very critical. I mean, in a country where power stations are spread out all over the country, and coal mines are only in one part of the country, basically the east and center, it's a major crisis. Actually, we consider anything less than 7 days as critical, anything less than 3 days as supercritical. Now, on the average is 4 days. You can understand what kind of situation it was. So it was really a critical situation, but Coal India and Railways, they acted absolutely. I mean, the best thing is resilience, you know. In war and crisis, we are great. So that's exactly what happened. So the railways and Coal India, they teamed up very well. And ultimately, the crisis was moved out. Better season had also come. Rains had subsided. October was a better month to start production. Gradually, the supply was more than the daily consumption. And bit by bit, a little bit of stock was built up. So it went up to something like 9 days by about 31st March or so. And the crisis was more or less waning. In April this year, unfortunately, we had something called heat wave, again a climate extreme. And this was a terrible kind of a heat wave. It was entire northern India and many parts of western India, eastern, southern India were suffering from 45-degree kind of temperature. So every AC machine conceivable wherever it was that started running. And again power demand picked up. When this picked up, in 2021 actually Coal India production didn't rise much. It rose by just about 27 million tons, 4%. It met the whole thing from the opening stock. It had an opening stock of 100 million tons, which it brought down to 60 million. So 40 million tons of stock brought down. But this year, since the monsoon is going to come, you don't have too much of stocks, so it had to produce. It responded to that challenge. It started producing about 17% more coal. So right now, Coal India and Railways are supplying a lot of coal, but at the same time, it is a very stretched situation. Railways had to cancel something like 1,100 passenger trains just to see that the track is available only to move coal. This was very sort of ad hoc kind of measures which had to be taken. The message what I'm trying to convey is that coal is not gone. Coal has not gone anywhere. It is very much there, and coal has to play a very significant role. So as I said, the broad picture is something like this, that we are heading towards maybe by 2030, if we go for a 3,000, if we try to target a 3,000 per capita consumption, then maybe something like 1,500 million tons of coal will be produced in that year. In 2050, we don't know the scenario. We do expect that this figure of 1,500 will not be busted. That will be a plateau, which will continue for maybe another 10 years or 15 years, and then gradually start phasing down. But if you look at aspirations, if we are really targeting 6,000 units in 2050, which I won't say that it is very highly optimistic kind of thing. We should do that. We have done doubling in last 10 years. So similarly, if we do that, then 6,000 and 6,000 is just at the beginning of development. Developed countries, advanced countries. So if we can't reach there, then India has failed somewhere. So if we reach there, then it is twice the current production or current consumption. Even if the share of fossil fuel becomes 30% as against 70% today. This is the broad situation I wanted to share with you, but how it pans out, and you see, question is, even that in that 2050 scenario, if coal is reduced to 30% and renewable is 70%, then what it means is today it is 100 gigawatt. At that time it has to be about 5,000 gigawatt. Now 5,000 gigawatt, simply the sheer quantity of land required, I don't know whether we'll find the land. India is a very populous country. It requires 4 hectares for one gigawatt. So how much of land will be made available? The entire India would be made available only for solar generation. That also cannot happen. So there is a dichotomy and there are issues. But at the same time, you would say we are very alive to the problem. We are alive to the problem. We are committed to sort of at least contain, if not reduce. What I explained doesn't mean reduction, but it at least effort to contain to the minimum possible the carbon footprint. Let me stop here and face the question answer. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think just press the wrong one. It's back. I was just going to say, wow, I can see why we hired Partha in India back in 2011. Obviously, his knowledge and his recollection of facts certainly made me feel inadequate about what I could remember. I can't remember what I did yesterday. No, thank you very much, Partha. That was very insightful and very enjoyable. Can everyone hear me? I'm not sure I'm talking to the microphone. I thought it was extremely interesting to hear your perspective on how India is coping with meeting its targets and having to balance obviously the demand that you need and the importance of energy security balanced against meeting fossil fuel targets. I guess from an Australian perspective, it's a slightly different scenario in the sense we're in a totally different position, and I'm sure, and I'll hand over to the floor in a minute for some questions. But I'm sure a lot of people here will agree that here, and I guess here we've obviously caught some flack because our economy is heavily driven by coal exports and other resources exports, but particularly this part of the world, coal. And we've been seeing unprecedented prices, and there's a thriving industry, but the public sentiment and the political sentiment is obviously focused on renewables, and on top of renewables is sort of net zero targets. So that puts pressure on our miners and our coal miners in terms of being competitive in the world markets. And so we see a completely different perspective. So it was very refreshing for me, at least, and I'm sure others, to hear your perspective and understand how India and the Indian coal industry and the Indian power industry is trying to cope with the pressures on all of us to do obviously the right thing by the planet. As we say, we've had what we were told 11 years ago, is that right, Tony? That there was a 1 in 100-year flood, and we've had it 10 years later, and I think we now will expect it to happen every 5 years. And so it's very interesting.
If not every year.
We hope it's not every year, but we had one, what was it, 3 months ago? We're not sure now about this weather right now. I think everyone's still a bit nervous, but yeah, but we and again, we probably didn't invest in the right infrastructure back then that we said we would to try to ensure that some areas of the floods and so obviously climate's changing the way we think. So that was very interesting from my perspective. I think in one sense it was reassuring probably for the coal industry to hear that from you, and I think we're aware, but obviously the coal industry here is keen to remain competitive, particularly probably the thermal coal industry, I think, in Australia, and I know that's been a problem, and so we have, I think people have been pleased to see the free trade agreement, and that's given us some advantage. I guess a question for you, from me, before I move to the floor, do you think that, there's the competitive side of Australian coal going not just into India but beyond, but particularly focused on India for this forum. Do you think we'll see an increase again in Indian businesses, power generators, or whatever, looking to invest in Australia into coal assets? Or do you think that's sort of been and gone, and Australia is potentially not the most economic place to do that?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Well, there I have a slightly different perspective, because as you know, the international financing organizations, they are shying away from investments in coal. And if India has to invest in any country outside itself, there will be a need for international financing. Naturally, nobody will agree for rupee financing of these things. Well, in India, we don't care, because Coal India is itself a profitable company. It has huge internal resources. It has a huge debt capacity. And there are state banks of India and other banks who are ready to lend to Coal India. So India investment in mining is not a problem. But the moment we step out, I think today it has become a problem. It was not a problem 10 years back, but today it's a problem. So that problem may come in between. That's what we see. But if you talk about Australian exports to India, and particularly, everybody knows that metallurgical coal, we depend on Australia largely. But on thermal coal, say Queensland is thermal coal mostly. So thermal coal, you see, thermal coal requirements in India were meeting largely from Indonesia, some from Australia, some from South Africa, a little bit. But Indonesian coal has become a little uncertain, because the moment China tries to draw coal from Indonesia, the prices there seem to go bust. And the quality and other aspects, there are questions. Sometimes they commit some quality, they send some other quality. I have experienced it very recently in Haldia Petrochemicals. So I know it for sure. We are having a great fight there. So I think quality-wise, since your quality or even South African quality will be more reliable, and Indonesia is slightly wavering, so maybe you may have some opportunities in thermal coal exports to India as well. And India will need thermal coal imports, at least for next 4 or 5 years, because you see there are certain processes have started. I mean, commercial mining has started. Captive miners are also being told to produce more coal. So all these things will lead to closing the gap as far as thermal coal is concerned, but that will take time. So I think next 3-4 years, there will be possibility of Australia exporting thermal coal to India, provided the right connections are made.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I was going to open up to the floor. Bill, you have a question?
Partha, you're talking about India's commitment to sort of climate change, but then in the next step you're talking about getting, or almost preferring Indonesian coal to Australian coal, whereas I think it's pretty well known that Australian coal has a higher calorific value and therefore more energy, less emissions. I don't see how that sort of makes sort of common sense to me.
Well, see, Indian coal consumers are very price sensitive, and it's not all in government hands. It is the individual power companies. They take a call, so they are very price sensitive. As far as price is concerned, even in rupee per GCal terms, Indonesian coal is cheaper today. Only thing is it has high moisture, and the sulfur is also at times a problem. So if they become more conscious about the impact of sulfur and moisture, particularly sulfur, because sulfur has an environmental implication, then they should get gradually drawn towards Australian coal. I see a possibility. That's why I said that there is a possibility, provided it is marketed properly. I think there is a need for you to bring this point to focus, that you are high CV. High CV means, of course, Indian boilers are meant to use low CV coal. But
then
what they can do is we can blend. Yeah, they can blend. You can blend 20-25% high CV with very poor Indian quality coal, low in sulfur. Indian quality is, in one sense, good. It is low in sulfur. It is high in ash. So if we blend with our coal, it becomes ash-wise, maybe comes down. Sulfur is not there. Calorific value is medium. So that's the right kind of thing to do. But then blending is required. That is the thing. So it's a question of marketing the product specifications properly.
Sorry, gentleman here in the white shirt.
Thank you. Welcome to Australia, Mr. Bhattacharya, and welcome to your son here in Brisbane. Hopefully we'll meet again.
Please welcome my wife as well.
Yes. Welcome to Australia as well, ma'am. And thank you for your very lucid presentation, and having lived in India for 38 years, and we all exactly understand the paradox and the contradiction India faces in terms of meeting the demand for energy and at the same time balancing its climate commitments. And Jim was talking about the advocacy that Aibc has been undertaking for many years. And I can say this here, that when the President of India came here to Australia, we were in Sydney. And that was a very charged up time, 2018, politically. And Jim from the podium had said that it's about time we gave Adani a fair go. And thankfully, sense has prevailed in this country, and because we have been arguing that you go to a remote village in India, talk to a girl, Munni, and tell her what climate change is. She'll say, what climate change you're talking about? I haven't seen electricity in 70 years to our family. So my point is, you talked about the space constraints in India when it comes to RE generation. In Australia, we have seen rooftop solar panels were extremely successful. And so my first question was that, what is the scope of commercializing rooftops in India for solar? And second is, in the ECTA, the early interim economic cooperation trade act which has been signed, tariff has been waived on coal. So do you think that's going to help India's case? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you see, rooftop is picking up. I would not say it has reached anywhere near saturation level, but rooftop is picking up. In fact, even in communities, like the community where I live, there's a huge talk going on whether 30%, 40% of every roof of every house can be given for the rooftop solar. And it has a scope. Certainly it has a scope. But the kind of energy that we are talking about, if you want to displace fossil fuel from 70 to 30, if you want to bring it down and take that place, the kind of energy requirement is there, you have to have large plants. You have to have large plants. You have to have a mix of both large and small, local and general, Then only it will be possible. Otherwise, it's very difficult because local has its own reach. I mean, for example, solar power in connecting in villages. It's a good thing. I mean, off-grid, you can do it, so it doesn't come inside the grid. But we are talking about grid power. In grid power is today 70% thermal power is to be replaced and bring it down to 30%, you have to have large power stations. For that, land is required. And the general estimate, I don't know, with efficiency improvement, maybe it will become less. Today, they talk about 4 hectares. I don't know whether it is 4 hectares or 4 acres, I'm not sure, per gigawatt. That is the scale. Not so, sorry, I'm sorry. Pardon?
The tariff on coal has been waived now in the act. So is it going to help?
Tariff on coal, actually, I am not aware of this. I'll not be able to tell the implication without being aware. So,
Okay.
My name is Ram, and thank you for the interesting topic we picked up on. One of the things that he was mentioning, a lady in a village in India, and we are talking about a man, Joe, from here in a village here. So the perspective what we were looking at is what we hear from the media and everything about the climate change and all of the things. But from the other side, what you explained, how do we reach out to the people to know what is important here, countries like India and Brazil and all the countries. So there was no counter kind of thing presented to the people across the world, so it's only, we know that it's the climate and things is the more arguments,
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I put it this way that you see, as I said, it is a customized kind of a thing. I mean, this transition will happen in a customized manner from country to country. In your country, since you are already at a very high level of per capita consumption, and I mean, the growth there would not be too much because you are already living very comfortable kind of a life. So any expansion of renewable will lead to cutting down of fossil fuel capacity. Not like India where both have to grow. It's not like that. But at the same time, the environment is an issue which is a global issue. If Australia becomes completely renewable, but there are large countries like India and China which are not renewable, it doesn't help the environment. So that is what is the central thing. I mean, how does the world tackle the problem? See, for example, one aspect where India depends upon the Western countries is for technology. Technology for carbon capture and utilization or carbon capture and sequestration. We don't have technology. We don't have money to invest in those technologies. But if we have cost-effective technologies, I think we can make our power stations much benign in terms of emission. And that is where the $100 billion per year investment, etc., is being talked about. Where is that investment? So I think if the advanced countries can come together and make that technology happen, cost-effective technology for CCUS or CCU happen, and that is given to countries like India, and sort of you can create a little bit of a pressure. If every year there is a COP. So in one of the COPs, you can take that as an agenda and create a pressure that way we are giving you the technology, please implement in every power station. That will mean a real breakthrough. I mean, that will mean something definite effort on the part of the advanced countries to help reduce emission on a global scale. See, so I think this is the way it has to be put. Did I answer your question or not?
Yeah, it's
fully?
answered, but the ignorance of thing is one way is more than the other side. So we know that the lights and all the things were the basic one which we need.
Yeah.
But again, that ignorance to the people and things, and that's what we are trying to say.
I mean, this is where I think if you have to comprehend the issues properly, one has to become a global citizen.
Yeah,
You cannot become an American citizen, Australian citizen, or UK citizen to understand environmental issues. Because then you will start looking at 25% of population of a country like India doesn't have access to power. So that's a problem. A global citizen will recognize that as a problem.
Interesting. Another question. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much for the nice speech, and I've seen very few people who can explain and advocate the coal in such a simple manner with the data, and also I think mining sector and resources sector in general has got very good supporter in you, and I'm sure they will benefit a lot. I have one question, and specifically for India, where the coal price is currently, and how it is going to impact the power sector in India, and with the type of pressure they have in terms of the price they can charge to the general public, and they have the long-term PPA. So how they are going to sustain, and how it is going to affect, how they are coping at the moment.
I must personally thank you for the question, because I love the answer to it. The answer to that is that Indian coal consumers are largely, I would not say fully, largely insulated from global price movements. They can simply forget what's happening in Indonesia, Australia, etc., as far as the prices are concerned. Our prices are completely, because it's Coal India, as I said, Coal India is 80% plus. And out of the coal that is produced, 85%, let us say, is supplied under a fuel supply agreement. The fuel supply agreement has a price clause. And that price is simply the price that Coal India notifies from time to time. And Coal India does not increase coal prices just like that. It doesn't have any obligation to align the prices to international prices. In rupees per ton today, Coal India's prices are 50% of world prices. No, sorry, it is about 30% of world prices. In rupees per gigacalories, it's about 50%. That is what where the Coal India pricing is. Because it has not revised prices. We believe that coal industry in this country has to meet the objective of generation of power in an affordable manner. As I said, 25% of the population doesn't have access. One of the reasons for non-access is affordability. So the purpose of generating power affordably is central to Coal India's pricing philosophy. And we say it with, in fact, during the IPO time, I had a lot of resistance everywhere. Why should you not price it at import parity or something like that? I said, well, this is a national cause. It's a government company. It's a national cause, and we espouse that cause. So Coal India pricing will be very different. And 85% of that 600 plus million tons will be available at that prices at any time. So I would say the Indian consumer of coal, on the average, largely, is insulated from price shocks. The rest 15% is sold through e-auction, where consumer sets its price. It is offered on a lot, consumers bid, and consumers fix the prices. That price is somewhere between the notified price of coal and the import price parity. Because if they don't take the coal under e-auction, they have to import. So they themselves offer a higher price. Like, for example, these days, we are getting a very high price of imported coal. But that's only 15%. And that 15% can also shrink. If there is a demand in power stations, we will not bother about e-auction. We'll send the entire coal to power. Power utility has to be met first. So there is a, I would say, it may not be sound very commercially prudent kind of thing. But after all, it's a company is owned largely by the government of India. So, well, government is okay with this, we are okay with this. And we practice it. It answers your question.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I'll just take another question.
Please.
How are we doing for time?
Yeah, sure. Time is not a constraint.
If connected to that question, the gentleman works for Adani, I used to work for Tata, and of course both organizations got burnt with the power stations in Gujarat. Part of it was the Indonesian coal issue where they suddenly put the tax.
Yeah.
But coal price globally has increased more than 200% in the last year and a half. Indian consumer can't pay, is not even paying, or the distribution companies, as we call them, discoms, they don't even pay the power generation companies. So we are in this silly
Spiral.
dynamic. And I just actually read a book by the former chairman of SBI, Rajesh Kumar, where he's dedicated a whole appendix to power, right from Dabol to all of these power stations. So there's a disconnect in policy also.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, somebody has to pay at some price. how are we going to manage this, need for growth? Yesterday I was actually at the ICICI Bank presentation, and they showed the global map. I wish I could put this up, of how India looked, satellite picture at night, 2012 and 2021. Actually, one is dark and the other is light. So, of course, it's moving forward. But these policy challenges and being able to afford it, even Coal India, which you say doesn't revise its price, so Coal India also has to invest money. Somewhere it has to work. Our tax base is 4%, is the lowest in the world. If we don't do that, then the rating of India is spoiled, which has an implication of the depreciation of the rupee, which means that it can't buy from Australia because every year you're depreciating just without any American interference and funny policies at a 4% every year. So it's a complex problem, and I just don't see how we are going to actually address some of these issues.
I completely am aligned to the issue, the point that you raised. You see, the basic problem that we have is the payment and financial administration of the power sector. That's a big problem. And that's the reason we hear about staggering numbers. The money that Discoms owe to Gencos is several lakh crores. Gencos owe to Coal India is about, again, 15,000-20,000 crores and things like that. What has not happened is the state governments, first they started with agriculture, they wanted to woo the agriculture. So this is vote politics. Agricultural sector will be given free power. There is no reason. There is quite a thriving agricultural sector. There are rich farmers. Particularly look at the farmers in Punjab. They are all mechanized farming. If they don't pay for electricity, who pays? Rather, it is more important for them to get better quality of electricity. Not electricity with 10 to 12 hours in a day or something like that with frequency variations and things. They would prefer to pay proper price for right kind of electricity 24/7. There is no doubt. But unfortunately, who is to bail the cat? That is the issue there. And this is a state problem. This is not really, central government did try from time to time. They actually offered some one-time solution to a recurring problem. The problem is recurring, non-payment. Solution was given one time. Like Uday is one solution. For some time they tried to give bonds, etc., etc. What has to happen, to my mind, is two reforms. It must be taken in right earnest, and I see the power minister as quite a vocal person, and he sometimes acts also. I don't know whether he would be in a position to implement this. Every power consumption has to be prepaid. All meters must be prepaid meters. Metering and prepaid metering. That should become the order of the day everywhere. No sector should be given relief from the Gencos and Discoms. Any relief that a state government wants to give should be through a direct benefit transfer. You transfer the difference, the money whom you think is eligible for to their bank accounts. Like they've done for LPG, for example. LPG was a much smaller issue, but LPG they did it very successfully. They transferred the subsidy to the bank account. But the price at market was the same for everybody. So that reform has to come as quickly as possible. Then you don't have to have those one-off kind of solutions every 5-7 years. That's not required. So if this is done, I think largely the problem will be met. Well, the other issues, of course, remain. I mean, rupee, we are seeing rupee to depreciate from time to time. Even this year, we are looking at some depreciation, maybe 2 rupees or whatever it is. But those macro issues can be dealt with. But these are specific problems of a sector that needs to be taken care of. Once these are taken care of, I think a lot will fall in line. This is my hypothesis. I am not an economist, so
I think the direct transfer thing with Aadhaar now and UPI.
Yeah, because we are enabled to do that. We have mobile phone network, huge network.
Yeah.
We have done it in case of LPG. It's smaller, but it's not very small. So if we could do it, that experience we can always multiply.
One other question. In terms of Australia exporting, given the delays in payments, do you think there could be a place for some sort of export guarantee sort of arrangement, a structured finance arrangement, which actually they can get longer credit so that, but they guaranteed the payment?
Well, as far as import of coal is concerned, I think all imports are based on LCs. I mean, they are required to, have irrevocable LCs. So there, I don't know how they manage, but they do that. India imports quite a substantial amount of even thermal coal. The same power stations who don't pay us, pay Coal India for the coal supplies at 30% of world prices, they've opened the LCs for imported coal. I don't know how they do it, but they do it.